Hello, it's one mana left, and it's time to do a video that I promised I'd do, and that's kind of a short, quick tier list of some delve builds for 325. The main purpose of this video is for people who maybe want to get into delve and want to pick a build that will do well in delve. Now, admittedly, in the 325 patch notes, there's a couple things worth mentioning. The first is that some of the money in Delve has been nerfed. Adorned was nerfed, which is going to really hurt the price of Curiosity. Last league, I was maybe farming like 1 per hour. Maybe even slightly more than 1 per hour. So when they were like, 18 div for a lot of the league, that was a pretty good money source. I think I could have legit done about 20 div an hour delving, which isn't as good as like some of the juice magic find strats this league, but like it's reasonable money. That being gone is going to change a lot of the money in delve. I think there's still going to be good money, and with less people delving, if it is worse money, the way things work in trade leagues is they're kind of self-correcting. Like, if people need certain fossils, if people need, like, maybe some drop-only base for recombinators, some fossil-only mod for recombinators, whatever, like, there might be things that are worth a good amount of money this league just because of some of the new tools we have and less people maybe delving than last league with the Adorn nerf, as well as the Fizz to Ellie and Fizz to Chaos helmets also being completely removed. But I think because of the self-correction of the economy, Delve would probably end up being probably like 20 to 30% less money per hour than last league. But it will still be appealing for people who want to have like an end game goal or target. Maybe people haven't delved before and want to try it. Or maybe people delve every league like myself and are going to just do it anyways because it's hard content that they enjoy doing. But I thought I'd go over some guides on builds that do well in delve. The last disclaimer here is this last set of patch notes had a big shakeup to some of the endgame defenses. A lot of the more average builds in the game, I think, haven't seen too much of nerfs in terms of defense. Like, maybe the flat armor and flat evasion on some of the aura updates is a little bit of a nerf, but then, you're getting back higher bases for gear to offset it. So I think at the lower to middle end, there's not that many changes to defensive packages, but in the delve end of things, on the high end of defense, there's been a lot of nerfs, like namely the Fizz to Ellie nerf that basically killed Armor Stacker, but Pathfinders as well. A lot of the kind of established tested builds have had heavy nerfs. Mana Forged Arrows lost Battle Mage's Cry, so it's off the table now. But that being said, that has shortened my list a little bit, so it'll be a fairly short list for this video at least. But that being said, just disclaimer, just because something isn't in this short list of builds doesn't mean it's not good for delve, okay? This is just more so for people who want to pick like a safe and tested build that they know will be able to delve and, not take some crazy huge risk on trying to theorycraft something new themselves. But there will probably be hundreds of builds that are like 600 capable that I don't name here. There will probably be 10 plus builds that are like 1500 capable that I don't name here. There will probably even be like 1 to 3 builds that are 6k capable that I don't name here. But if you're looking for inspiration, that's what this is for. So I'm going to start off with boneshatter jugg. The way I'm scoring these is I'm going to kind of rate the power overall. But if I just only graded on pure power, the only builds I'd end up having are like the insanely expensive builds. And not everyone that wants to delve to 6k. So I think for the sake of this video, it's good to include a lot of the like builds that still excel in delve, but maybe in like the 600 depth environment. And they have lower budget requirements so that people can play these right away on league start. So I'm going to include a couple builds like that just for the people that want to do like 600 delve, boss farming, maybe a little money, whatever. Or just, dip their foot into delve, but maybe not necessarily do some like full-blown degenerate build. So start off is boneshatter jugg. There's probably not a lot to explain here. I'm sure virtually everyone knows how this build works. You do a lot of self-harm with trauma with boneshatter. You build up stacks. Now, this league with a lot of the melee changes, like one of the maybe more popular options in general for boneshatter is probably Slayer. Slayer with the gain and frenzy as endurance charges with the new endurance charge changes is going to be really good for generic boneshatter, good for mapping, good for bossing. And Jugg lost a little bit of small hit defense, but gained defense for max hit. But despite maybe for mapping, Slayer being the better boneshatter option, maybe. I don't want to get Karn too excited. There is for Delve, I don't know if I'd call this a requirement, but Untiring with boneshatter is so insanely good for Delve. Because all that self-harm you're doing to yourself that's pure fizz is giving you an insane recovery. And I've seen this number go over 100,000. So if you're ramping up to 100 stacks of boneshatter, and you have really high attack speed, the recovery from Untiring is straight up like 100k. So for tier 16 or tier 17 mapping, or even like uber bosses all the way to, Slayer's a fine option. Like, you don't need 100k recovery for any of that stuff. But for a Delve situation where you're surrounded by a screen full of monsters that have a good amount of health and a good amount of damage, that recovery sustain is really, really good. And this build doesn't have a whole lot of requirements to get it going. You pretty much just get, a fizz weapon. You can go one-hander or two-hander. You don't have to go Dawnbreaker or anything. You can go Dawnbreaker. But you basically just get a really tanky build that scales attack speed to kind of double-dip trauma stacks with, direct damage scaling with attack speed. And, yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is a really low skill build. You can kind of just stand in the middle and face tank. I would say the target depth for this is 0 to 900 because the damage is what's going to fall off. If you put the depth up to like 1500, you're going to start to get some really long fights. It's really good early game, and then it falls off. So that's why the damage is a 4 and the tankiness is a 9. On these, I'm going to give them an all-rounder score. The reason for this score is if someone wants to play a build that's also good at like mapping and bossing, I think this is valuable because there are builds out there that really only excel in Delve, and but they're bad for most of the rest of the game. That's not to say boneshatter is bad for the rest of the game. You can make a good boneshatter build, like I was talking about with Slayer. You can make a fairly effective boss killer that's boneshatter. But when you build boneshatter the way it's built to do well in Delve as Jugg, you don't really prioritize a lot of speed. You maybe have like the Grasping Vine small cluster jewel so that you're, getting more damage and double damage while stationary. But like, if you build a boneshatter character that's really good for Delve, it's not necessarily the most speed demon for Mapper. So I'm going to give it a fairly low all-rounder score. But the redeeming quality is it's very league start friendly. It's very budget friendly. You do not need that much. I just realized I'm like blocking my POB here, but like you do not need that much to get it going. You can pretty much start the game right away, get to yellow maps, and like already have like a fairly well put together boneshatter character. And I'm gonna give it a hardcore score just in case anyone cares. But this is pretty much not just like a raw defense. The difference between tankiness and hardcore viable is consistency. There are tanky builds out there that have terrible consistency that aren't good for hardcore. Boneshatter's not one of those. Boneshatter's tanky, but it's also very consistent defense, so it's going to get a high hardcore score. So for early delving, like in the 3-digit range, Boneshatter on League Start is a very good option. Even though it doesn't excel in like the late game, if you want to dip your foot in the delving and get started, Boneshatter is a very good option. Next option I'm going to give here is Hierophant with Frostbolt, Ice Nova, Archmage. So this build, I'm going to go off of the Garatha POB. Is, they reworked Archmage last league. They made it so you don't need to get absurd cost to get the flat damage. Now the flat damage is based off your mana. So now you can scale some things like damage cost, like mana cost reduction, and make this fairly spammable. For those who don't know, Frostbolt Ice Nova is a very high damage effectiveness 2-gem skill setup. It's not a lightning gem, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a cold gem, it can be a fire gem, chaos gem, whatever. Archmage just applies flat damage. So the biggest thing that matters for Archmage is damage effectiveness. And Frostbolt Ice Nova's a combo that gets really good effectiveness. Now, I like the Garatha version for this because it's really tanky. And let's get scores up for this one. So I pre-scored all these. Uh-oh. We're going to do this most ghetto way possible. There's 15 better ways I could have done this, but we're doing it this way. Let's go. All right. This one, I'm going to give a score of 0 to 1200 depth. It does fairly well early game. You kind of just need the gem setup. It's got a lot better damage than boneshatter. So that's why I'm going to give it a bit of a higher depth rating, because, you know, boneshatter is starting to turn pure ZDPS when the depth scaling gets up to like 30 times health. 54 mil on the POB for the Frostbolt Ice Nova is like fairly reasonable. 54 mil will feel really good at 1k. 54 mil will still like feel maybe okay at 1500. But the health multiplier jumps from 39 times at 1k up to 107 times at 1500. So there's a really big step up of almost 3 times health between 1000 and 1500. I think at this DPS, it'll feel really good at 1k and start to feel ZDPS at about 1500. So I'm giving it a score of 1200 for the depth. Damage tankiness, I'm going to give 7. It does have instant leech, has really high recovery. Maybe I should give it a higher tankiness score, but like the POB for this is really high max hit. The downside to this for tankiness, though, despite having a good max hit, is the fact that you are largely standing still, whereas there are builds that maybe have a lower max hit but have a lot of layers of avoidance and are very mobile while doing damage. The boneshatter jugg has the advantage of insane regen. That's a little bit more consistent than instant leech, because you could have a situation where you're like darkness bombed or something, you're not instant leeching, whereas like untiring from boneshatter jugg still applies in all those situations, so it's a little bit more consistent. But it's a pretty good all-arounder. You can pretty much do all the above-ground content with this skill. You can do tier 17s, you can do Ubers, it's good. It doesn't have a lot of hard requirement items. You know, this is a mana build that doesn't need an Indigon. You can just basically start it with just rare items, stack mana, get the gems. And I'm going to give it a pretty good hardcore score too, because this is not a low-life ivory tower build that would be a good example of a build that has high tankiness but bad consistency. This being no ivory tower, no core skating elixir, is going to get a better score for hardcore than maybe tankiness, just because it's consistent. You're not going to get randomly killed by chaos because a flash siphoner took your core skating off when you're low mana. Like, it's a consistent defense. Grotha played this on hardcore. He got to 600 delve in hardcore, which is like top 10 on the ladder. He builds it tanky. It's still pretty good damage. So this is a good like starter build that can scale into doing like reasonable depth in delve. I'll link to some of these videos if you want to check them out. But next up, I'm gonna include this on the list. Not that I'm gonna recommend anyone to play it, but I thought this would just, I'll touch on this briefly. I thought this would just be funny to make a point. And that's Armor Stacker. Armor Stacker's actually still here. It's not nearly as strong as it was. I'll admit that. Because it lost Transcendence. 100% Fizz to Ellie, gone. No more Transcendence. So you no longer get Infinity Armor applied to elemental damage with all Fizz taken as Ellie and then Chaos Immunity from CI. That's all gone. So the way you get tankiness on this setup is you get you have to stack harder into ES. You have to basically use the new energy shield bases, maybe some recombinators, to just go harder in energy shield. And I think even this POB, you need to go harder into int scaling as well. But despite the max hit being much lower than Armor Stacker had last league, this is like the bare minimum you can get to 6k with. It's probably more capping out at maybe like 4k. But the damage is very nice. So the reason this is a really good setup is 727 mil, while good for single target, like really good. The thing is, like, this is gonna, I just realized this is kind of gonna be a bad spot no matter what. But the thing is about this, it's insane budget. So I put a minimum of 1,000 depth because you would never play this sub 1,000. This is a very expensive character you have to put together. You would never play this anything under 1,000 depth. So I'm putting a minimum 1,000 on this. I'm going to cap it out at 4,000 because I think by 5,000 or 6,000 it'd be the max is just a little bit too low without the Transcendence scaling. But it is pretty serious damage. Because this setup, like the old setups used Dawnbreaker to get 100% Fizz to Ellie. and you lose about half your flat armor, but this build gets it back with double replica dream feathers, since you've abandoned completely the Dawnbreaker scaling. You can double up the dream feather to get your damage back from the missing armor, and then Molten Strike got buffed by like 75%. So this is actually a higher DPS version than maybe last league's armor stacker, but it's not nearly as tanky. So I'm like half serious including this, but the reason this is not a good build to pick is because the performance relative to the budget is really bad. While it would be better than like most, like 99% of builds in the game for Delve still, despite the nerfs, the reason this is a bad build is because the budget is negative infinity. I was gonna put 0, but like it's actually worse than 0. Whatever in your head you think a 0 out of 10 is for budget, armor stacker's worse than that. So I'm just gonna give it a negative infinity. But I thought I'd include this almost just like as a fun challenge, because I want to see someone build this. Long story short, like it's not going to be as strong as last league, but I'm curious to see someone build this because I think it'll still do pretty good damage. It'll just be glacier. Next up though is, this is a fun one. I have a bias toward this one, I think. But we have Mjolner, Archmage, in this case, Ball Lightning of Orbiting, Hierophant. Alright, I'll move this back over here. So, I put a video out on this a couple days ago. Mjolner is a fairly tested build at this point. It's, I've done it for many, many leagues. All the way back in Sanctum, I did 5,300 depth as Mjolnir. I could have done 6k if I put more time into it. It was probably the bare minimum of power necessary to get to 6k. Someone made 6k this league. If we go to the Delve leaderboard this league, and we go to Hierophant, there is a 6k Delver that did Mjolnir. And this build is pretty much completely unchanged, aside from it loses a little bit of evasion if you run Grace, but it gains the new Endurance Charge damage reduction for 16% reduced LA res, which is a pretty big deal. And the other thing is, you lose 16 all res, but you can get that back with a Leer point if you really want. So like 16 all res for, 50 damage reduction, 16 damage reduction is like still pretty dang good. But I'm going to give this the depth rating of 300 to 3,000. The main reason I'm going to put the minimum on there is because you need some unique items to get the build going. You don't need Indigon to start at like 300, but if you want to even get to like 500 or 600, you kind of need Indigon. So on league start, not great. But once you get Indigon, you can start pushing like 600 plus. And I think 3,000 is about where it's comfortable, but you technically could do 6,000. I do have, in my, demo video here, I'm at 4918. So, this is a 5k demo. And the damage is not on, like, Mana-Forged Arrow level. If it was, I would probably play this over Mana-Forged Arrow in 324. But it's still pretty powerful. It's stronger than a lot of builds. Like, this setup has, like, 110 mil DPS, which is, like, okay. 6k would feel a lot better with more than that. I think like 250 is about the minimum for 6k to feel really comfy. But like I said, if you're willing to struggle a little bit, this is a build that will do well in Delve. I'm going to give it an all-arounder score, though, that's pretty high, because this build, as you can kind of see, is very good speed. Like, it's very comfy, at least to me, of just holding Cyclone and just kind of blowing things up. It's a good mapper. It's a good bosser. If you can get the build initially set up, it's a very good all-arounder. There's not a lot of slowness to it. It's got good speed. The only thing that might be viewed as clunky is, like, it's got chorus gating. It's got a little bit of an uptime, downtime window. But it's not as hard of a downtime window as, like, Mana-Forge had. Like, the downtime is, like, you have Cloak down and you're losing the flat there. But, like, most of your flat comes from Archmage now. and if your spend stays over 16k, even when cloak's down, your cloak down damage is still like 80%. So your damage uptime is very smooth and very close to 100% most of the time. It's not nearly as like spiky as like the uptime and downtime on Manaforge was. So this is, I'm gonna give it a high all around score. Budget League start those at 5 because, like I said, to really get the damage to be good, you need Indigon, and Indigon is an Uber Elder drop. Not Uber, but regular Uber. And this league, there was a lot of people playing mana builds, and they got up to like 13 or 16 div. Next league, I think mana builds will still be strong, but a lot of people will be playing the standard archmage setup. Not a lot of people, not as many people will be playing Indigon versions, especially with like some Battle Mage's Cry nerfs or removal, basically. So maybe Indigons will be like 6 div, I don't know, but because of that desire for Indigon on league start, and even like getting the initial items like Mjolner and Prism Guard and all that, it's a little bit to get going. Hardcore viable, I'm gonna give it a 3. It's pretty low. It's tanky. It's good defense, but there's a coruscating elixir. I can't in good conscience. I can't accurately, honestly say this is a good hardcore build if there's a coruscating elixir. Personally, I am a degenerate who's played mana builds for 5 leagues now. I think I could probably do a reasonable amount of time on hardcore with coruscating because I know what to look out for. I know when my flask is down. I have the muscle memory built in. But I have played like more hours of mana builds in the last 15 months than probably like any other Path of Exile player that's not Steve playing Manaforge. So it can't get a good hardcore score because of that. But it's still a pretty solid Delve option, and it's a really good all-arounder if you like doing other content besides Delve. Alright, next up, this is a bit of an oddball one, but I'm going to include it and kind of explain my reasoning here. So let's go to this POB, and let me just edit this in here. So this is a build that was actually kind of strong before. But there's a lot of buffs in 325 for this build. This is not like a build guide from this individual or anything. This is just like the top person on depth for PoE Ninja who is playing this build. But I'm going to be honest, their build is not that high geared. They're at 2.5k depth, and their stats are kind of trash. Like, this past league, I think if they leaned harder into in-stacking and did a simplex maybe even, they could have got like 20k ES pretty easily. I think next league, there's all the new higher tier bases. We've seen some of the stats on some of the new bases, and I think across the board, between multiplicative quality and the insane base numbers on the new energy shield bases, I think you're talking like 35% more energy shield next league, which is then 35% more damage for Ephemeral Edge. And then a lot of the skills got buffed. There are 3 main skills that do well with this setup. It's Molten Strike, which is just really good for Delve, Splitting Steel, and then Lightning Strike of Arcing. I've seen all 3. In fact, if you go to Trickster here, you will see the top 3 that have a reasonable depth of like 2k plus. There's one of each. Lightning Strike of Arcing, Molten Strike, another Lightning Strike of Arcing. 4th is Splitting Steel. So those are kind of the 3 main skill gems that you can use. But I think next league, this build will get to pretty crazy stats. So I made a POV with this that I kind of cheated the numbers, and I just like slapped in some extra energy shield. I didn't like scale up the gear to like, you know, very high quality. I just slapped in like a flat extra energy shield number. But like, it gets pretty good damage. Like 275 mil with Molten Strike. Let me hide this actually. 275 mil with Molten Strike is very good because in Delve you get additional strike targets. So if you have 3 strike targets and you're 275 mil and you're surrounded by monsters, you're actually like 800 mil AoE. Which is like enough to feel pretty dang comfortable in Delve. Stuff will die reasonably fast. And like just like some 20k plus energy shield trickster with 100 suppression and like plus 16 max suppress for 66% reduction with 95% evasion and 90 max res, like, is insanely tanky. Like, it's good tank numbers. And then you get the benefit of getting like energy shield gain on hit with discipline and basically infinity recovery from that. So there's not a good 325 league guide out, build guide out for this build. This is a concept really. Just like knowing what the numbers were in the past couple leagues, and then just like envisioning the melee buffs, rage changes, higher energy shield bases, just kind of extrapolating where I think this build is going to end up. I think this will be like a top 2 or top 3 delve build maybe, but and probably a pretty good Valdos. Well, maybe maybe an okay Valdos build, but it's just there's no one who's made a 325 build for this yet because one, everyone's making league starter builds right now, and this would be a very end game build, and two, we don't necessarily know a lot of the stats on a lot of the bases yet. We've seen a few in the teasers, so no one's made this. But you wait in like 3 weeks, someone will make this. There'll be a Molten Strike, Ephemeral Edge, Trickster guide, and someone's gonna have like 22k energy shield and just spank and stuff. Like, give it like 3 weeks, and these guys will pop up. So I don't have like a current guide to link to here, but I just know what the stats will look like when you apply all the buffs to this build. So that's why I'm gonna rank this high for Delve. It's gonna be expensive, so the budget score is gonna be low. But this is similar to like the Trickster builds that do void maps, which would give it a very good hardcore score. But it's just not budget friendly. It's not like Armor Stacker. It's not a negative infinity. It's not like you need 17 mirrors to play it. But I think you need a couple hundred div. So it's gonna get a pretty bad budget score, but everything else is gonna be pretty good across the board. Finally, what you may have guessed is the top build on the list. You're not paying attention if you don't guess this right, but it's this one. It's this guy. Now, maybe I'm biased, all right? That's a reasonable take, but it's actually the other way around. I didn't just make a build and then cope into saying that this is a 6k delve build. It's the other way around. I made this build to be the top delve build. That's like the origin story, right? Like, so naturally, if I didn't rank this number 1, I wouldn't have made the build at all. But the numbers are stupid. I've done the demo video on this. You can watch that video. I'll link it. The numbers are just stupid. It's off the charts. It does insane damage. Let's get the POB open. Let's look at the numbers. It's in its own category. Like, it's over 1 billion damage per target with 5 targets. So in like a full AoE situation, it'd be like 5 bill AoE. It's very tanky. It's very fast. This is going to be my build for the league, naturally. But the depth limit, this build flexes on 6k. Like, it's not hard at all. I'll show you, actually. Let's not talk about it. Let's be about it. Let's just do this, 5 mod T1 Azerite node. We're at, I'm past 6, yeah, 6,009, alright? This shouldn't be too bad. As you can see, I have very fast leap slam speed, so with really good micro control and like mouse positioning, you should be able to leap slam faster from node to node than Mana Forged Arrows could phase run. So you should be able to just like travel from one node to the next in like 6 seconds. Like, that's gonna add a lot of depth per hour. Like, look at my HP. Am I struggling? Am I hurting? Is stuff living? Like, this is supposed to be just, like, full stupid mode. Like, oh, I did take damage there. I don't have crit reduction right now, is one thing that if I build this next league, I'm going to build in. But occasionally I take a big spike that I'm almost sure every time is a crit. So I went to, like, 65% there. But next league, I'll get some crit reduction to avoid that. But, like, it's overkill. This is overqualified. This is like, you know, the PhD guy teaching science class. I talked to Steve a couple days ago in the interview. This is the build he's gonna play. You know, we saw Mana Forge hit the delve cap of 65k. And, you know, Steve's had a affinity to playing strength stackers in the past. He's played Venom Gyre to 6k twice. which is kind of insane considering how glassy that build is. But, like, I just one-shot a max HP rare. Like, you know, everyone thinks Devours hit hard. I'm just going to stand still and tank him. It's overkill. This is... There's not another build right now that, with no nerfs, flexes on 6k this hard. And remember, this is before the patch is live, okay? Keep that in mind. 325 is not live yet. All the buffs that this build is going to get are not live yet. So, yeah, this is going to be the top delve build. I think a lot of people who are paying attention were probably aware of that going into the video. I won't, like, you know, beat on the drum too hard, but yeah, I'll link to this. If you're actually wanting to push like 6k, this is probably your best option. But I thought I'd give kind of a full range of, like, here's builds that are good early league for, like, playing around at, like, 600 and like, trying to get experience with Delve, get a little deeper. Here's builds that can push deep but might struggle to get to 6k, even though it's possible. And then this is the other end of the spectrum. So I'll wrap it up with that. Enjoy 325. Delve might be a little worse money, but I still enjoy doing it just because it's, you know, it's the hardest content in the game, and therefore it's fun. And enjoy tomorrow. I'll see you guys later.